Great that we've got such a good turnout. And we are recording the session. I'm sure that that was mentioned as you logged on. And please, we encourage you to use the chat, to ask questions, to signal any, interesting comments. We value everybody's input today. So my name is Angel Jones, and I'm the CEO of Homecoming X, and EX stands for Executives and Expertise and Excellence and Experts. And we are an executive search firm. We've been operating across the continent for the past 20 years and specializing in not just permanent executive talent, but part-time fractional talent, as well as hourly executive talent, which is a very exciting place to play these days. So we welcome all of you in the chat. Why don't you put where you're coming from? I mean, I know Leonard's in Nairobi. I think we've got one or two in Lagos. Obviously, we're in Johannesburg, but it'd be great if you put in the chat where you are. And I think on the in the audience, we have many HR talent acquisition professionals, as well as many finance people themselves, as I also founders, and then just connections and friends and candidates of Homecoming. So we will be distributing this afterwards, as we'll be, packaging it in different pieces of content that will go out there. But also, if you've got some lovely comments to share, it would be great that that also goes into our write-up. I think, this is a really great opportunity once we've heard the stories from our speakers to actually, converse and share learnings. So this is the agenda. We're going to first have Leonard, then CJ, then Roy, and then there's the discussion, questions, and open floor. Should you want to ask a question anytime, please do put that in the chat, and then summary, learnings, and thanks, and we end at 4:30. So we're delighted to have you all here. And I'm very excited to welcome Leonard Kimutai. And we actually placed Leonard as the Strategy and Performance Director of Coca-Cola Beverages Africa. Such a wonderful candidate to work with. Leonard's a business leader with 20 plus years of experience as a CFO, an M&A lead, financial controller, and supply chain finance lead in e-commerce, m-commerce, FMCG, agribusiness, and real estate industries. He started his career at Unilever before moving on to the finance director role at Copia, and he's managed teams of 50 plus and budgets of $30 million north of that. He has his BCom Finance and MBA Strategic Management from the University of Nairobi. Welcome, Leonard. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Angel. Always a pleasure to join you and in these forums. What everyone doesn't know is Angel reached out to me several months back for one of the roles, and it's been a pleasure to work with Homecoming X and with you and the team. So it's really an honor to be here today. Thank you. In terms of who I am, I think Angel has covered much more than I expected. So thank you so much. But I'm generally speaking a business person, a finance professional, and I pride myself in developing and coaching young talent. So it's really an honor to be in a forum like this where, we are all looking at how we can grow our talent and get the right people in the right place. So in terms of my story today, I have had the privilege of hiring for many roles, right from when I was in Unilever many years back. They trained us on how to look for talent and how to develop talent. So it's been a long journey, and I've had many successes working with both talent recruitment in general management, but also specifically to the core role of finance. And I've had, recruited many people that have grown in the ranks and succeeded. But I want to share with us today one of the experiences that taught me a lot. And, some of them that teach you a lot are not necessarily the most successful of recruitments. I remember many years back, not so many years actually, I was in charge of finance as head of the regional finance team, and we were expanding into a neighboring country. As part of that role, I also recruit for a head of finance to partner the country MD our country GM for that matter. So I went through the usual ropes with support from experts, especially from our HR team. We went through the motions, and they narrowed down to 3 candidates that I was to see and make a choice from. When I spoke to them, they were very, very good candidates, the 3 of them, and I was quite impressed. But one candidate stood out for me for many things. He was very articulate in his understanding of finance and accounting, very clear experience and examples of what he had done in finance to solve specific problems. He was very clear in terms of his financial acumen, and importantly also in terms of the industry that I was in, which is FMCG generally. He had experiences there and even beyond in technology and what have you. I was quite impressed with that candidate. When I sat down with the country GM, she was also very impressed, and it wasn't a difficult decision to choose from the 3. So we went ahead, made an offer. The icing on the cake was that the candidate was quickly available, so we didn't need to wait for long to be able to get them into the business. And I was frankly very excited to have a strong member within my team that would run and lead the team in our neighboring country. So I onboarded them, went to make sure that they are settled well in the country. I went through the routines of, setting up regular engagements, getting them comfortable with whatever they needed to be comfortable on. And we started discussing business. We started discussing our functional deliverables. And to be frank, from a technical perspective, I didn't need to teach him anything. He was quite sound. He was quite clear about what he wanted to achieve. And he needed then to build his team and to develop skills within the team and to actually get right on with the rest of the business, because we were looking for that leader there to be able to partner the business for growth. And so it went. I was very comfortable, and our engagement started, spacing out because I didn't need to talk to him every week. He was already very clear about what he needed to achieve within his space and how finance needed to operate. And therefore, by and large, I started giving a lot of ground for him to be able to run the show in his space. And I would touch base every other 2 weeks and every other occasion whenever there was anything. And I felt very comfortable and well covered from that perspective. A couple of weeks down the road, though, after I could see that I could let go of, I got a warning shot that not everything was okay from the country GM. And she came to me feeling very frustrated and said, look, our finance resource, now it had become mine only, though we recruited both of us. So how things move very quickly. Is not playing ball. I'm having a lot of conflict in the team. And when I narrow down, it's basically arising from the way the head of finance is handling issues. These colleagues and generally how he is resolving issues or areas of the divergent views with the rest of the leadership team. And so I sought to understand more from her. As I was doing that and talking to her and talking to my resource, the head of finance, a resignation came through to me on email from one of the staff under him, saying that, I've had another opportunity and I'm leaving. This was a very key resource that I knew before I recruited the head of finance. Very young talent, very promising, a succession plan candidate that you'd want to keep within the business for purposes of, the pipeline. And so I reached out to him and asked, what was the issue? And when I spoke to him, I understood more that, the new leadership, according to him, did not listen to him, did not care about him, according to him, and did not really consider him as an important resource. So with those two perspectives, I knew I had a situation on the ground that I needed to sort out. And so I went about, starting to, initiate a rescue plan for this. Yet, when I looked back a few months earlier, I was very comfortable. This was the best candidate that I had. But the long and short of it, it was very rocky, and I learned quite a bit about that. And I think what sticks out for me is, while we tested and I tested the technical skills in depth for this candidate, I actually did not go a further road to actually test how he works with the team, how he fits into the culture. And therefore, I have had to do a lot of rescue planning or course correction much later on, which is something that when I look back years later was something I should have done much more diligently within the panel before we actually made a choice amongst the three. So I thought I would share that as a red flag for this forum, because it's not only the ability to do things, but it's really important that the candidate is able to fit into the culture, and more importantly, build very strong relationship, because without a strong partnership with the general management, with the rest of the leadership team, then it's going to be very difficult for you to have impact as a finance leader. Thank you. Back to you, Angel.
Thank you so much, Leonard. That's such an important point. You know, I think maybe in the old days, whatever a CFO was only about finance, only about the technical skill, but actually it is all about relationships and being able to bring the other stakeholders along with you and being able to look across, I suppose, the different units of the business. And I think, you know, if anybody loves the relationships, it's us. As you remember, we have this relationships are gold everywhere we go in terms of, you know, being able to build them, and our staff as well. I think when they're even on the first round, when they're interviewing somebody and their gut feels that there's something there that they don't feel like they're that personable, I say, trust your gut, even on that thing, because the ability to have that chemistry and build relationships, especially in finance, is a very key thing. So thank you very much for that. We are going to then go to our wonderful CJ, Cheryl-Jane, CJ Kujenga, who I've known for many, many years through her career. I also know Nicola, one of our recruitment consultants on the call too, was with CJ at EY back in the day. So we're kind of trying to see what we can find out that those two got up to back in the day. Let's find them with some wine. You say nothing, but I don't know if I believe you. So,
yeah, I think lots of wine.
Good. CJ was appointed the Group CFO of Ascendis Health in December 2020. Prior to this, she was the CFO and Executive Director of AdCorp Holdings, which is a massive group of many different businesses within that. She was also the acting COO of AdCorp Holdings and interim CEO from October 29 to 2020. So a really great demonstration of the different hats you had to wear. CJ has 20 years commercial experience, including 9 years as a partner at EY, where she was involved in an advisory capacity to various industries, including tech, telecoms, manufacturing, infrastructure, retail, healthcare, and financial services. And she also served on the Accounting Standards Board for 6 years. She has her MBA from UCT and her BCom honors from UNISA, and she was nominated for the 2020 CFO Awards. Go, CJ.
Thank you. You took me up quite a bit there. But thank you, Angel. I mean, this is, it's quite an interesting topic for me and very close to my heart. As you know, we met a few years ago now, and I was in the process of doing quite a bit of recruitment at the time for different roles within finance and across the business at AdCorp. And what I wanted to do for you and the audience today is just maybe provide some context to how I select candidates, and then talk a little bit more, share some more stories. So the last probably 6 years of my career I've spent in businesses that are going through massive forms of transformation. Both AdCorp and Ascendis needed turnaround in different forms. With Ascendis, we managed to conclude a massive balance sheet restructure. With AdCorp, it was more operational. And what that meant was we really needed people in the teams that were thinking on their feet. I often talk about T individuals. So I'm constantly looking for this deep functional expertise or area expertise, but someone with a very strong bar at the top, very broad bar, someone who thinks beyond just, in this case, finance or whatever their functional area is. And I came across something recently on LinkedIn, which I thought was actually very relevant and spoke to a lot of what I've experienced over the last few years. We've talked about VUCA and the VUCA world quite extensively over the last probably decade or so. This level of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity that's sitting in the world. And this person talked about an acronym called BANI, B-A-N-I. And it really resonated because I think as professionals, and particularly as finance professionals, it almost goes against what we are trained to be. So the first is this, acceptance that of being brittle. Historically there was this illusion of strength as humanity. And the last few years have really tested our what we call our known assumptions. They're not. You can't really come into a room and say, "I know X, Y, Z." And again, I'm talking from a finance perspective. You've got very deep technical people. They understand that debits and credits work in a particular way. But the reality of the world and the reality of most businesses at this point in time is that there's more that you don't know than you know. And the A stands for this level of anxiety that we're sitting with because we've lost control. We are so overloaded with information, with bad news, very little good news. And there's this prevailing sense of anxiety in the world right now. We could look at it at a microcosm in terms of your organization, in terms of South Africa, broader. It doesn't matter, but you're in most boardrooms and in most discussions that we're having as executives, there's this prevailing sense of, can you really plan? Can you really come to market and say with any level of certainty that this is the way we're going? And then linked to that is the N, which is non-linear. So and this I think has been, probably we've sat with this for longer than the other pieces because there's no predictability in this world. So again, speaking from a finance perspective, someone who's been taught how to be fairly linear in terms of how you are trained up historically. You're now living in this world and having to apply your craft in a world that is actually non-linear, that is not predictable, and you're being called on to provide decision-friendly information. And then this link to that is this, incomprehensible part of the world which has really shattered our illusion of knowledge. And that acronym stuck with me because one of the things that I've found over the years is recruiting for finance is particularly challenging. You typically find two groupings of people. You find the hardcore technocrats, the people whom you can sit with, who will sit with, your accounting standards, with your policy statements, who will understand your controls in your business from to Z. And that's critical. It's important. It's certainly an important core of finance. But what I found is the superpower of finance is when you can bring someone who takes that as just base knowledge. That's something that is par for the course. That is just, it's almost hygiene factors. And overlays this with, okay, how do I get to understand the business? And how do I apply my skill in understanding the business? How do I get to understand the business context and the broader macro view? And when you find a finance person who can sit and straddle those two areas quite comfortably, you typically find someone who really has longevity in your business. And so when I recruit, I typically look for those people who have strong functional expertise, but actually, more importantly, the ability to apply it across. My view is at junior levels, we can have technocrats. As we become more senior in finance, we actually need you to be able to apply your knowledge to help the business to grow within the context of all this uncertainty. And so the ability, again, to sit with uncertainty, the ability to be able to say, okay, in as much as we can't provide a straight path, how do we then articulate where we are as an organization, what the numbers are telling us, start to predict and give some level of directionality that guides decisions, but be flexible in that, be able to pivot as and when it's required. So I'm looking for characteristics such as curiosity and thirst for knowledge and learning, that ability to be agile, to be flexible, the ability to collaborate, not just within finance. I get very concerned when I sit with auditors or finance people and all they sit and do is talk finance. Go talk to sales, go into ops, go and walk the floors, at Coop, I had this thing once a month. I would go into a different site and just go and look and see what's actually happening ground up. And that's critical, in addition to having grit resilience and all of that. And so, if I share a couple of war stories, I'll share something that happened to me as part of a recruitment process when I was sitting on the other end, and immediately told me that this was not going to be the organization for me. And I had a recruiter come and approach me about a role, and they were I think they were looking for a very linear path to growth within finance. And anyone who knows me knows that I have not had a linear path. Even when I was at Ernst & Young, I was not just in audit. I had multiple roles. And they really puzzled and could not decipher my CV. And for them, they were like, well, I think you need to go back to basics and go back like 10 years in your career. And I immediately knew that this was not the right organization for me, because the world is not like that. And actually, one must not be confined and put into this box in finance that says you can only be finance if you've only ever done finance, because that really restricts you. And so that was an interesting one for me sitting as a candidate, because it made me realize actually that what I thought everyone looked for in finance and finance professionals was not necessarily the case. Sitting on the other end now, when I was doing recruitment, a big learning, I think, for me, if I just listening to Leonard, I actually, maybe a version of what he mentioned, and we were looking for certain heads in finance in our businesses. Again, I approached these recruitment roles with my usual gusto. Angel knows this. I don't know if you remember this about me. Like, if I decide we're recruiting, I'm very clear. We've got very tight timelines. We're recruiting because this is a critical role required in our business, and we don't have a year to dilly-dally. We actually need to fill this role. And in one of the functional areas, we met this person, and she's very strong technically, very strong on paper, came across as the type of personality that I assumed would fit into the business. And we moved as quickly as we could, made an offer. What transpired for me was interesting, because in as much as this person, when they came into the business, still ticked the boxes, what I hadn't factored in was the intra-team dynamics at the same level. So not how this person dealt with their team, not how they managed externally and the rest of the business, but how they worked with, if you were to think of a mini finance exco with the other finance exco members, so to speak, there was really no chemistry. And for the longest time, I have to admit, I tried to put my head in the sand and pretend it wasn't happening. But I had to take a step back and actually factor the fact that actually I was dealing with very different personalities, and people that I needed to collaborate in a particular way. And I had to force that collaboration. And when I reflect on that particular lesson, I've often wondered, do you then recruit cultures that are the same? Because when we talk about culture fit, what does that actually mean? And I'm a strong proponent that you should not be bringing people into a team that look, sound, feel the same, or maybe don't look the same, but sound the same, have the same approach. And in this particular case, I guess I tested myself because in as much as these guys just did not see eye to eye, they really did not have a culture fit. But as the recruiting manager, I had failed both parties, because what I hadn't done was lay the foundation for the integration I needed. Helped each party understand, well, these are the strengths, and this is what I believe this person is bringing to the party, and these are the strengths that you bring, and this is how I see you collaborating together. And in that, actually, I see your differences. I understand your differences. I'm not expecting you to be the same. I'm actually looking for some of that conflict, because that conflict in your different approaches and in the way you're looking at things. One was a strong tax professional, one was a strong, typical technical accountant. was going to be particularly important for us in this organization. And so culture fit is an interesting one, and I'm hoping we can unpack it in more detail, because what does it mean? When we got it right, I think we eventually got it right, and there was a lot more synergy, and the two worked a lot better together. But it took a long time for that integration to take place. And I was at risk of losing one or both very strong people in a team that I thought I'd been purpose building, with a vision in mind, but I hadn't executed effectively on what I needed to do. I'll pause there, Angel, and hopefully we can unpack this one of culture fit a little bit.
Perfect, thank you. I think, it's absolutely crucial, that piece. I can't imagine how hard it must be to go into a new place as the CFO, where actually your job is to pull rank on numbers or say, no, you can't, but you need to get buy-in and, have some early quick wins and make sure you get the respect, but you listen. I mean, it's a head of an art, actually. It takes that CFO technical one-sided propeller head hat and completely turns it. It's actually one of the hardest things, I would imagine, to have that guts to stand firm. And it'd be interesting from a female point of view, CJ, when you've had to actually stand firm as a woman and say, this is the budget and this is how we're going. And obviously it depends on the rest of the culture within the organization in terms of how much leeway or how much respect you gained early on to be able to have that say. I think what we do when we look at these roles for employers, obviously, the more they can share about their strat, the better, because, is this a fundraising piece that you need to go as a growing venture, or, what is the treasury part of it? Where's the strat side? How open are you to the collaboration piece? And we also test the automation, interestingly, because it tells us that people are quite, forward thinking, they're embracing the tech, they're wanting to make that happen. But I cannot imagine there are, I think, some quick tips, and anybody can share them in terms of gaining respect quite quickly so that you can stand firm when people are trying to push you around a bit on the budget or the numbers. I mean, it must be a very interesting thing. So maybe we can open that up again after we've heard from the wonderful Roy. So Roy Masamba is the third speaker in our webinar today, and Roy and I even go further back. I think Roy, when he was heading up Safaricom people, we were in London. How many years ago? 10 years ago, Roy, I think.
Yeah, easily.
2015, 10, whatever. And there we were, and we had many different exhibitors in London showcasing jobs and properties and schools and all the rest. And I could instantly see that Roy's personality was like this. And I think I said 10 minutes before, Roy, won't you just jump on stage in front of all of the audience and tell your homecoming story? Why you came home. And you're such a gentleman. You said, absolutely, with pleasure. And you jumped on the stage and gave everybody this wonderful reason of why you chose to return home. So if I can tell you more about the amazing Roy, he's got over 20 years experience in various countries from Europe, America, Africa, and the Middle East at executive level for a London-based FTSE 100 telco and a FTSE 100 FMCG, and for a Dutch and Middle East-based mobile phone operator with operations in 24 countries in Africa and Middle East. So he's worked as a very strong transformation leader. He has a history of building strong HR functions at Vodafone, Airtel, BAT, and Naspers MultiChoice Group, and startups too. Roy has his MBA from Cranfield University, his BSc Electrical Engineering from University of Zimbabwe, and completed a strategic leadership program at London Business School. So I love that a head of people has an engineering background. It's, so great to see. And I also must disclose that Roy, when he talks about startups, he is a director at Homecoming X2. Since we've launched our platform, he's an investor and a shareholder. And he also heads up a agritech business, and you can describe it better than I can, Roy, but a big agriculture business that's growing and growing. So welcome. It's lovely to have you here, and we look forward to hearing from you, Roy.
Thanks, Angel. Always flattering. You lost me 2 minutes ago, and I was wondering whether you were still talking about me, but thanks for those very kind words. I hope everybody can hear me clearly. Yeah, engineering and then HR, but certainly not finance. So I come onto this call wearing, let me say, a chief people or CHRO hat in terms of recruiting CFOs and some of the things that I've been involved in. And I think it's the best lessons are always come from things that didn't go so well. Because in themselves, then you also know what to avoid. I think what to do, a lot of that is very clear in terms of job descriptions and everything else. So I'll kind of give you my sense from two examples anchored on two different themes. The first one will be anchored on how to match and why is it important to match the mission of the role with the career aspirations of the candidate. And I'll explain what I mean by that. And then the second example is really on why it is so critical to assess the working chemistry. And I think it touches a little bit on CJ's concept of culture, but I'm going to sort of double down a little bit and talk about working chemistry between the CFO, the CEO, and the CHRO, for the simple reason that those two strong governance roles heavily rely on tension with the CEO, but also a very healthy tension with the CEO. And if one is not working or working the other way, I think both actually can end up failing. So let me start with the first one, where it's important, and there's an example of how it didn't work out very well, to match the mission of the role and the candidate. And what do I refer to as mission? Yes, you got the job description, but I think the mission of the role is what is expected of this role in the next 3 years or medium short term in this job. If one, you could say, what are the objectives? So it goes really beyond the job description itself. So for instance, it could be a turnaround period. So you really want a CFO who's a stickler for controls and so on and so forth. Maybe it's a growth period where you want a CFO who's more BD type of person, has the flair of talking to investors and commercial banks. That's different. So beyond the job description, where I've seen there's a problem is where you hire a CFO, but you're not matching their aspirations with the mission of the role. So in one example, the business was really looking for a control freak CFO to plug the corruption, to plug the leakages in the system, to plug the procurement and make it clean and sleek. But this CFO came to this role after having acted as a CEO in another job for 12 months. So clearly his thinking had really moved to the top bar of the T that CJ talks about. And I think that's where his mindset was. Definitely a good, technically strong CFO, but his interest was no longer in that space. He was really happy trying to strike new deals in terms of business development for us to expand. He was involved, particularly with me, in something that we wanted to do that was going to be a really huge CapEx investment. And it was actually through that particular exercise, the supply chain procurement was neglected, and an audit was then done to realize a lot of conflict of interest were overlooked. A lot of overpricing was overlooked because I think he just felt that it was mundane and, tend not a deliberate blind eye to it, but just kind of got more interested in other things as opposed to what the mission of the role was. So I think, it's something that at the recruitment stage, it's important it is tested out through the right questioning of the candidate, definitely looking at their career history, really asking questions about where they're going, really being clear to the candidate about this is really what we want done. Yes, it will probably build towards whatever your aspirations are, but this in itself is the foundation for that success in this role. I think sometimes we get excited by candidates and we overlook really doing that grounding work, much to the chagrin and of course, the failure of the role, irrespective of the fact that you actually get a good, technically strong CFO. Yeah, so that's one example. The other one where it's really got to do with the working chemistry between the two strong governance roles in a business, which is your finance and your HR, working with and in tension with the CEO. Really strong candidate came in, very strong personally and personality-wise, very strong credentials, working alongside a CEO who was very entrenched and was probably looking for, people who would follow his instructions, as opposed to somebody who was more collaborative around what these professionals are also bringing to the table. And I found myself as a CHRO being involved to the nitty-gritty of relationship counseling between two very senior executives. And that was exhausting for the better part of 6 to 9 months. I think I remember through the process, changed counselors twice. And this is a critical relationship in any business, CFO and CEO. And the CHRO is drawn into that because you have to solve it, but at the expense of what else? Other things. So it is really important as, recruitment, through the recruitment process, that there is real discussions, if not psychometrics, around leadership styles and climates, both for the CEO and the CFO, if the CEO is hiring. Make sure those things are mapped across each other to highlight potential friction points. And if you think those ones are probably insurmountable, then maybe you have a mismatch in terms of candidate and the role and that relationship, because that relationship is as important as the relationship between the CEO and the CHRO. And in this particular case, the inevitable happened. Strong female candidates who could have gone places in the group ended up having to have a compromise agreement, which in itself was very costly, and they had to leave. And eventually got somebody who was, more in the camp of old boys to actually take over the role. Very sad. So went backwards from diversity, went backwards from a gender perspective, went backwards from a cost, went backwards from reputation of the company in terms of bringing externals to take senior roles and so on and so forth. So I just thought I'd share those two examples because those are the nuances that you don't get in the job description. You don't get in the dimensions of the role. You actually get in the softer part, the underbelly of the role and effectiveness of the candidate in a particular role, which really has to do at a very macro level to what we're going to talk about hopefully later, which is culture. But this is really relationships between two people. They're as important as the technical skills of the individual. Back to you, Angel. I'm sure we can talk about this.
Thank you, Roy. Thank you. It's such a good point. We just often do psychometrics on the candidate and not necessarily the CEO at the same time. And that's a fascinating approach. I mean, I'd imagine you can't really tell everything, but it gives you some idea, and maybe thinking that, they don't have to be some immediate quick wins from the CFO, that there's some time to settle in and understand, sort of learn with the way around working with that CEO, so that there's not an axe over the CFO's head to deliver immediately, and that ideally gives some time in terms of making that work. The chemistry around it is huge. And so CJ, I'd also love to ask you just now from a female perspective. I think that's a fascinating story. And Leo, maybe, you went from a CFO into a strategy and performance role, which I'd love to, to hear those differences, as it's strange to have another CFO there. And Roy, maybe I think, your perspective from a huge multi-choice group across however many countries, and now in a startup environment, you see both, is there commentary on the risk-taking capacity that the CFO needs more in a growing venture or less? Or do you think they're two very different animals, one from corporate or one going to growing ventures? Apart from us just doing the work for big companies, we are working a lot with your growing ventures across Africa who might have secured funding or their Series A and now need top caliber people. And we are helping them place fractional CFOs, meaning that they have access to a top person, but only every Monday or every Thursday in their business. So they're still in there, that the candidate themselves wants to be part of this exciting thing, but they can't afford him or her full time. And also it might be a bit of a risk to join their full time. But on the other hand, you've got bringing all of that thinking into the room. And I think that's also interesting from a founder perspective, that chemistry. You know, sometimes founders are really good at stories and all the rest, and they need a very strong, you know, commercial head to maybe, you know, have less risks. But I've also seen it. I worked in advertising in London, and then came home and started an ad agency here. And, you know, we had a CFO who was so risk averse that I believe there were many times that we, you know, were too cautious about spending money or sticking our neck out and taking a, you know, a stab at this. And I think what I learned certainly as a founder was I was absolutely doing myself a disservice from not understanding the numbers properly, or a balance sheet, or any of those, you know. So encouraging as much as possible for founders, you know, knowing also how to read those numbers from afar, and also ascertaining what that risk appetite should be. You know, is it very different in a multinational compared to a founder, a venture? You know, they often say we want an entrepreneurial corporate person who's had startup experience and the big corporate, you know, can take risks, but no, you know, keeps the ship steady. It can't be an easy job. So I don't know if CJ, you want to talk about the gender piece a bit. Can we go to you?
Okay, sure. And Roy, I think you raised a very, very valid point. Angel, I'll share two elements with you. First of all is this concept called the ladder of acceptance. What I found works for me is something that a coach shared with me in my first year or two as a partner. And they said to me, look, you probably know a lot. And you can contribute a lot. But if you come in and on day one try and show that off, everyone's going to shut down. Spend more time trying to understand. And as part of that, start finding ways of those low-hanging fruit and the quick wins. I think sometimes in trying to demonstrate that, you know, I'm hitting the ground running, you come in with what is sometimes seen by an organization as a very abrasive approach. Whereas if you spend time, what I try and do is I try and spend time in the business, to spend time with the managing directors. I want to understand different parts of the business. And as I'm doing that, I'm already collating my kind of diagnostic, that 30-day diagnostic, and I understand where I need to focus time. But when people feel that you are spending time understanding their business, understanding them, understanding what's important to them, then they are a lot more accepting when you sit and have those difficult conversations. And I've had to have very tough conversations with people in the business, because the different businesses, because sitting in finance, particularly in businesses that are going through financial challenges, is not fun, even when you want it to be. So that ladder of acceptance ideas is the first thing I'd leave with you. The second is this concept of understanding kind of the below the line and above the line. I talk about this below the line, above the line. So the kind of the hard, what is it that's required to succeed, not only in my role, but in the counterparty's role. So when you're dealing with the CEO, what does the CEO need to succeed? When you're dealing with managing directors or other finance execs in parts of the business, what do they need? Like, what are the hard things? And then spending time and also trying to understand what are the things they want to be able to say they did. And that's the second part to find out and understand is a really hard thing. And it's really about listening. It's about asking the right questions. When you sit and engage, you know, so what would you like to leave as a legacy? What's important to you? You know, you come out of a meeting with the CEO. What was your sense of that? What frustrated you? What worked? And find ways of weaving that into conversation so that you start to understand your CEO a little bit deeper. Now, it's not always easy. and Roy, when you're talking about that working chemistry, especially the CFO, CEO working chemistry is so critical. You find different CEOs. For me, one of the CEOs I worked with was probably the best working chemistry I had. Almost every day would have a quick touch point about what he was dealing with, what was top of mind. I had no doubt that it was because I don't think he had anyone else in the business to talk to. So I think that was part of it. But that really helped because what it enabled me to do was to be the right type of support for him and what he wanted. I've also worked with CEOs who are very introverted. So you actually have to coax it out of them. And on the one hand, it's great because they're not micromanaging you. On the other, you actually can run quite tight. And so it's really about that delicate balance. And as you were talking, Roy, I actually have a counter question for the HR professionals and the recruiters. Is this something that is done, where the CEO, CFO chemistry is tested in some way beyond just the general recruitment process? Because I think that's a fantastic idea.
I love that. I love that. I mean, I think that's a fantastic thing to start bringing to the party and seeing what clever ways there are of testing that piece. Certainly very, very important. So Leonard, having a sterling career in the beginning, and then you were the CFO of Copia, which was the fast-growing e-commerce startup in Kenya. And then when we got the brief from Coca-Cola Beverages Africa, they said we need a strat and performance director, and go and find us a CFO, which was very clear steer from them. Usually we might have brought people from marketing and a bit from commercial and sales and maybe somebody here, but that was a very clear directive from strategy and performance that it must come from that CFO world. So it would be interesting, Leonard, maybe, from a startup to a big thing, or how different is your role now? Do you find you're always only thinking about the numbers? Is it easy to shed that CFO hat in your new role? And any insights possibly on, a fast-growing startup in the tech world?
Thank you, Angel. Once again, very interesting example, if I may say. So, yeah, as Angel has said, I was moving from a startup where, there was a lot of and we were just chasing how we can be able to meet that growth, how quickly we can be able to, roll out to the rest of the markets, and, building more and more capacity within the business, right from the people all the way to our product portfolio. And now I move into this thinking role where you have a mature business and you have very established system, strong leaders, with very strong experience as well. And then you have to provide the steer in terms of strategy. So it was very interesting, and it is very interesting to see that pivot away from there. Of course, there were many things that I picked from the startup, which was a tech startup. And it really helped in terms of looking out there, the possibilities, what is possible, how we can change things, especially in our route to market, and how we can build a stronger future-proof business. But on the other hand, there was a lot of challenge in terms of shifting that mind into how do we then establish growth in an already mature business. In some of the markets, we are upwards of 90% market share. And unlike where I was, it wasn't about numbers. It was about now, what are the possibilities? How do you get people to consume more of our products? And yet this is a household product, unlike a new startup where you are finding a lot of people unaware about the product. And it's just a matter of exposing it, and you're off and running, and you look like, you're achieving a lot. Then you come to a mature business, and you have to think differently, not just the numbers, but think about what are the possibilities out there. And for me, it has helped me a lot to put myself in the shoe of that growth officer, of that commercial person, that at times I was black and white before, because I'll tell them, look, show me where the return on investment is. And it's not as clear at the moment, and it may not even be clear in a year or beyond. And therefore, you're in a position where you start appreciating a little bit more about creating new things, creating growth, and establishing pockets of opportunity within a very tight market, as opposed to where you have just to meet capacity building and what have you to grow. So it's a shift in mindset, and it's a real shift in how you deliver that. A lot more conversations to actually shift middle. You have a lot more conversations with many stakeholders who bring in different perspectives, and therefore you have to co-create the idea. You have to collaborate, and you have to be very patient with the results, because they may not be very fast coming. But at the end of the day, those little steps, when you look down 1 year, then you realize you've actually shifted the needle. Back to you, Angel.
Thank you so much, Leo. I mean, I think the idea of patience is challenging. You know the numbers will come, you're investing now where it's going to come later. And, I think I can't imagine if with a finance hat on that, it's only ever about the numbers and you're not allowed to think as strategically. Although what we've certainly been hearing is how important it is to be thinking of the business as a whole and not just, only sitting in your numbers department. Roy, do you have anything to contribute in terms of that startup world versus corporate, or any other insights you might want to mention?
No, absolutely. I mean, maybe allow me for a minute to just talk at least about myself, because I forget to mention this. Since my involvement with Homecoming and Angel as an investor, shareholder, and actually in the start of the platform, and we started to talk about portfolio careers, right? And I actually found myself from about 9 months ago in a portfolio career setup, where I'm a part-time CHRO for a fast-growing Nairobi-based last mile trading business, and I give them 2 days. I'm obviously involved in Homecoming. As Angel said, I'm also a co-founder and director of Terra Green, which is a very ambitious Pan-Africa effort to grow biomass and use that for sustainable energy, and the things happening in that space. And then I find myself actually in Cape Town this week, because tomorrow I've got London Business School graduates that are on a world tour that I'm spending a morning with, facilitating something around sustainable business leadership. So I think the point there is, the idea of portfolio careers, it's actually real, and it plays to my need for that variety, where there's a fast growth corporate, I'm trying to build my own, and here I am also imparting not only my functional skills, but other things to the growth of Africa, and that's where my passion lies. And I think it's the hardest thing is climbing from big corporate role into a startup. You almost have to throw away 70% of what you knew and actually just think like a man on the street. But the beauty about it, what that I found working with Angel and also in my other startup business, is you kind of know what good looks like, but you're learning to build towards good and great. You're not flying blind. Why do I say this? And I'm not criticizing because I've done any survey, but if you really have just been from an entrepreneurial background and probably haven't worked and seen what good looks like, it is a journey you will walk eventually, but it's probably a little bit different, and it's probably a little bit walking in the dark at certain periods of it. Whereas if you work for a big corporate, you learn to be nimble and adjust yourself. I think you'll find that your acceleration curve is actually that much steeper. It has been my experience, actually, just as somebody who quit corporate and got onto the entrepreneurship ladder. Back to you, Angel.
Thank you so much, Roy. I think, that portfolio career is something we are so excited to embrace. And ironically, it can also be a retention strategy. So you might have a corporate who's got a really strong CFO, they're wonderful, but this guy is getting either, itchy feet or wondering what else is out there, and maybe can't be as innovative and, gung-ho in the current corporate. So the education job we're doing in our world around this A3 age of work, anywhere, any place, anytime, is that this person might then go down to a 3-day week with this corporate. Maybe on Thursdays, then they are the fractional CTO in a really sexy edutech business across the continent. And maybe on Fridays, they sit on a board or two, or they're a speaker. So this idea of offering a talent in any way you wanted, executives, whether you have them full-time or for interim roles or fractional roles or board, or speakers or sector specialists, where you hire them for an hour. I think the beauty of stories like this and hearing real examples is that we love place people, obviously, who have been there, done that. They've got the t-shirt, they've worked in the trenches, they know what works and what doesn't work. They know they can break the rules because they understand the rules in the beginning. And I think this whole mantra that we have as Homecoming, we used to be all about physically repatriating the skills home, and now we do most placements of people who have got global experience, but they're on the continent. But now we're also able to do what we're calling the virtual brain gain, meaning that we can actually tap into a strong Swahili-speaking Kenyan living in New York, who's the head of cyber in a growing business on a fractional basis, you know, and sharing that. So this idea of the only way to source scarce talent is to share scarce talent. And I think, Roy, what you alluded to as well, to some extent, is the fact that you're wearing a couple of different hats. And obviously, we need to be very clear about the conflicts of interest, but is that you can come in quite objectively. You know, you're not worried too much about the politic here or there, and maybe that chemistry doesn't matter as much because you bring in thinking that you know is fresh and from experience. And I think certainly from a founder point of view, to have heavyweights in the room when you're thinking stuff through is absolutely wonderful. From that fractional CFO basis, we do see it works really well if there is a full-time finance manager, obviously executing operationally all of that strategic thinking and output, and that's really starting to work well. But I've certainly learned a lot in this. I mean, I love and your fascinating thing, CJ, about brittle anxiety, nonlinear, incomparable. I love nonlinear. Everything's nonlinear, whether we like it or not. Even the most stable corporate is nonlinear. And Leonard, very much about this relationship building. You know, the world has moved. You've got to be a people's person as a CFO, whether you like it or not. You've got to know what opportunities there are and choose at an event, because it could be an investor or, you know, clever ways and creative ways of doing pricing and collaboration. So this idea of moving CFOs out of just that box into relationship building and being a real people's person is absolutely fantastic. And Roy, thank you so much for this chemistry thing. I think we need to crack this idea about how important that chemistry piece is at that exec level. And I'd certainly love to explore any other ways of being able to measure that quite easily. So I don't know if anybody wants to say some last thoughts or any other thoughts. Anybody you want to put up your hand or comment, or the open floor? CJ, I see you, lots of laugh out loud, says Emmanuel. Emmanuel, I particularly like the narrative, changing the usual plug-and-play hiring model and engaging broader and beyond the confines of technical knowledge. Absolutely. Great. Thank you, everybody. They're really, really rich learnings. We're going to make sure that we curate it all so that it goes into packageable, digestible, bite-sized chunks for the world to see. Something also that we've also just in our interview process done, and I think it makes it all the more important, is when you saying to the CFO, if you weren't a CFO, what role would you like to be doing? And that gives that indication of where they, you know, where they want to stretch, or starts to give a type of idea about their personality. But it's about relationships and building and attending events and, you know, building on lots of different relationships so that you get to know, we get to know our candidates from years standing, not just that, you know, initial contact, and it stops from there. So thank you all very, very much. I appreciate you guys and all the stories. And if there's anything more for anybody to share, otherwise we'll say goodbye.